You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. Bitcoin, Ether, Ripple, Litecoin, and more. Cryptocurrencies and other digital assets are taking the financial world by storm. This exploding market provides everything a savvy trader needs: volatility, volume, and liquidity. Provided you know how to find it. That's where we come in. Welcome to the Crypto Rundown. Each week, we'll break down the latest trading activity, trends, and developments on everything from coins to tokens, futures, and even OTC options. If it's moving the crypto markets, then you'll find it on the Crypto Rundown. Now it's time to dive into the exploding world of cryptocurrencies and digital assets. It's time for the Crypto Rundown.
All right, everybody, that music means it is time once again for the Crypto Rundown, the program here on the old Options Insider Radio Network, where we break down everything going on the crypto side of the fence. We're going to talk a lot of Bitcoin and the options therein, some futures, all the other good stuff, the vol, the volume, the term structure, the open interest, all that good stuff, and a lot more. Probably getting a lot of ETH stuff popping off there as well as a bunch of other altcoin, and, of course, your questions. Mix it all together. You have the tasty cocktail that is the Crypto Rundown. My name is Mark Longo from the aforementioned network, as well as, of course, from theoptionsinsider.com. Pleased to see so many new people, new earlobes joining the network these days. Make sure, if you're just listening to crypto, make sure, if you haven't done so already, upgrade to the full network. You're getting shows throughout the entire week then, not just one show a week. We will keep you busy. We will keep you engaged on the options and derivatives front. That is my pledge to you, which, of course, is important these days in these crazy times to have information you can rely on. We try to be that, and we have done so for 13 plus years now on the network out there. But we love new folks coming in all the time. Make sure, if you like what you hear, leave a review on your platform of choice so new folks can continue to enjoy and discover this content. And joining me on the old Crypto Rundown today, we've got a returning guest here joining me to hold down the guest hot seat here. He is Mr. Greg MAGADINI, the co-founder over there at Genesis Volatility. Greg, welcome back to the Crypto Rundown program.
Thanks, Mark. Happy to be here.
All right, we're happy to have you. Lot to talk about. You picked a good one to come on, Greg, so let's get to it. Without further ado, let's dive into the Bitcoin breakdown.
It's time to explore the latest trending activity, trends, and developments across the world's leading crypto market. It's time for the Bitcoin Breakdown.
All right, everybody. Welcome to the Bitcoin Breakdown, the portion of the show where we do exactly that. We break down all the crazy activity going on in the world's leading digital asset out there, which is, of course, Bitcoin. And, you know, after a pretty sleepy start to the summer, not a heck of a lot going on, post-halving, the vol kind of coming in, the Bitcoin kind of languishing in a range for a while, it's just been off to the races for the past few weeks. Talked about what we thought was a really good week last week, and now coming into today's show, we're just Bitcoin on the rampage to the upside. We were saying for a while there, why is there so much positioning on the 11,000 strike? People are forgetting the 10,000 strike. Well, this week, maybe makes that make a little bit more sense. Coming into today's show, Bitcoin was just a tick under 11,400, 11,399. That puts it up about 558 handles, and it has since ticked up over that much-watched 11,400 levels, about 11,416 right now. So it's closing in on north of 600 handles out there. Net on the week, we tapped out at the end of last week. It looks like about end of the last show, about 10,841 or so. So a lot to unpack out there. And Greg, you're a good one to help me do it because you guys out there run, of course, Genesis Volatility. We have had a lot of new listeners discover the show even since your last appearance. So maybe we'll start there. Real quick update. What the heck is it that you guys do over there at Genesis Volatility, Greg?
Yeah, sure. So we do data analytics on the DERIBIT options platform. So we look at all the different volatility measures, whether that's SKEW or implied vol. We have stats on open interest. You can filter that down by different expirations and different specific contracts. You can also check out volume. You can adjust the volume for only the buyers being the aggressor or only the sellers. You can look at the volume for long-dated options only, so on and so forth. So really kind of a tool set at genesisvolatility.io where you can really dig into all the activity that's occurring on the Bitcoin and Ethereum options over at Deribit.
Yeah, it's a pretty good offering. I've had a chance to dig into it a little bit since your last appearance. And, since we launched this show, we've been using a lot of the SKEW.com data on here. And we still use a lot of that, of course. But I am pleased to say that your data, Greg, is starting to make its way more and more into the rotation every week, sir.
Awesome. Love it.
Since you're our guest, there's a lot to unpack. We can go realize, vol, implied. But it's been a crazy couple of weeks. So maybe let's start there. What in general has been your takeaway? What's really caught your eye from the last couple of weeks of activity out there in Bitcoin from a vol and all sorts of perspectives, Greg?
Yeah. So I would say, the past 2 weeks, we've had huge rallies both in Bitcoin and Ethereum. And we've seen a lot of volume come in both on the futures and as well on the options. So just to kind of give you some context, typically Deribit was trading about 10,000 contracts on average of Bitcoin options. And then we had a big spike on the 27th, and that traded about 50K options. And now we're still holding up at about 18,000 options. So we're about almost 2 times the average currently in Bitcoin options trading. And then for the ETH options, it's even more drastic. So on average, you were doing about 50,000 contracts a day. And then lately, jump in volume, and we're at about 140,000 options a day. Same thing with the futures. So the futures for both Bitcoin and ETH are about 3 times their average, with some spikes all the way up to five times daily average. And so we're really seeing like a lot of participation in the derivative markets in this rally. And so we really think that there's kind of something good going on, so to speak. And there's a lot of follow through as far as people participating here.
There's something good going on, not the least of which, Greg, that you guys quote things in contract volume, which I love. That's one of my pet peeves in the crypto space is everyone and their mother throws around notional like it's some sort of meaningful metric. And so we're kind of forced to do so as well here because no one really calculates the contract volume. I even give CME a hard time about that. So, hey, give me some real contract numbers, not this stupid notional you guys are throwing around. But I'm glad to see, Greg, you are joining us in fighting the good fight and trying to bring crypto back from the dark side and towards more contract volume there, Greg.
Totally.
Now let's break down some of that volume, what we've been seeing out there. Let's start in the vol side of the space. As you might guess, listeners, vol getting a little bit firmer out there pretty much across the board in Bitcoin land. 1 month realized, which is, of course, the actual volatility that is being exhibited in the marketplace, listeners, ticked up to about a 51% from 25%. That's probably not a surprise if you've been paying attention to the show for the past couple of weeks. What may surprise you a little bit more, though, is implied vol was pretty high last week, actually coming in a little bit, down to about 66%. Still frothy, still pretty elevated compared to most other products and commodities out there. You got to go deep into some small biotechs and others to find things that are higher vol levels sustained over time than Bitcoin. But it's down from the 71% we saw last week, down to 66% this week, which is kind of interesting out there. We're seeing big moves in the SKEW again. Last week, we've seen swings from positive to negative, staying negative this time, but down from about 12.3% on the show last week to about minus 6.4%. Huge move in the call side of the ledger as well. And Greg, I'd be curious to get your thoughts about that as well. The OI out there in terms of net open interest, what's open out there. It's huge move to the calls. Again, probably not a huge surprise given the fact that we've seen just nothing but upside for the past couple of weeks out here in Bitcoin land. But it was not too long ago, 53%. It was pretty much a coin flip. Calls to puts out there. It was pretty much half and half out there. And now it's gone fully the way of the calls. In fact, Greg, I was playing around with your platform a little bit before the show and looking at the activity over here on, I think this was the 2nd, so yesterday. And the lion's share of the activity on the options front that day was people buying premium in calls, which, again, not surprising given what we're seeing out there in the underlying, but still, it's pretty impressive. In fact, again, Greg, going back to your platform out there, you got to go all the way back to the early days of July 7th, really. It's about a month till we've seen levels kind of approaching this amount of interest out there on the call front. Is that pretty much your takeaway as well there, Greg? What are you seeing out there from an overall trading perspective? And also, if you have any thoughts on what we're seeing from a vol and a SKEW perspective out there, sir, have at it.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely seeing a lot of action on the call side, both in Bitcoin and Ethereum, and especially pronounced in Ethereum. So just to kind of give some context, the contract with the most open interest in Ethereum is the December contract, which in Bitcoin is actually the August 28th contract. So if you look at the SKEW on the ETH contract for December, we can see that the 25 delta call SKEW is about 12 points of implied vol more expensive to the call side. For Bitcoin, it's only about 6 points more expensive to the call side. So you're really seeing kind of like a lot of positioning going into the market where people are just really buying up these call wings. Something else that's really interesting to notice is that on the ETH side, and a little bit on the Bitcoin side, but mostly on the ETH side, if you go out all the way to March 2021 expiration, you could see that the put side of the curve is completely flat. So you're basically looking at the money vol having the same delta same implied vol as like a 10 delta option or 20 delta option. So a completely flat structure. And so there's kind of two elements there. You know, why would you get such a flat structure, SKEW structure on an option like that? So one thing to remember is that a lot of people are trading these options and then hedging them out with the perpetual swaps or the futures. And so on platforms like BitMEX or DERIBIT, basically you have a perpetual that's paid out in the underlying and that's denominated in dollars. So if you're short this perpetual swap, basically you're long gamma. So as ETH falls, your position gets better and better and better. And as ETH rallies, your exposure gets less and less and less. So there should be a little bit of downward pressure on the SKEWs to the downside, but to have completely flat, to me seems like there's some sort of edge and opportunity out there. And we've also seen back in March when we had that big sell-off, these SKEWs went really big to the put side. So it's not that these SKEWs can't get bid. It's just that right now they're completely flat, and it seems like there's some sort of opportunity out there for someone to do something.
A lot of opportunities out there. We'll get to all the ETH opportunities in a minute over there in the altcoin universe. Let's finish parsing some Bitcoin out here first. As you might imagine, OI was building up, as you mentioned, out there in Bitcoin options across all the major platforms. Your Deribits, your OKEXs, everything else out there. It kind of peaked coming into the big day in the end of July. And, of course, July was the number one leading open month right now. So when that came off the board, the OI has fallen off a wee bit again. So we did blow through the June levels of open interest out there, which a lot of people were watching. And then we kind of retreated from it since then. We'll see what the next hot month is for positioning. If past is prologue, then it'll probably be eventually September. Crypto folks tend to like their quarterly expirations for whatever reason out there on the options front. So coming into Showtime today, we had Deribit with about 1.3 billion open interest out there. Then we've got OKEX, 91 million. Actually, CME number 2 with 133 million, though. OKEX number 3, 91 million. And then LedgerX number 4, 47 million backed for whatever reason. Still can't find any love out there. In fact, other people are starting to pick up on this now, too. We've been talking about this for a while here on the show. OI is just zero for backed and has been for some time. I think even CoinDesk put up something about it recently about how they just can't find any love, and actually how this streak is now 38 days as of the time of this article, which is the longest period they've gone now without any trades in their options. They've had other inactive streaks before, but this is the longest. So not exactly a strong barometer out there for backed going in. Deribit, though, still dominating the tape from an OI perspective, up to about 90% of the total OI out there. So interesting stuff afoot out here. In terms of the action, what was the big print out there? Well, Greg kind of just mentioned it was our last show day, actually. Last Monday, the 27th, was the big day across the board. Saw 527 million. Again, this is notional. You know I hate notional, listeners, but sometimes it's hard to quote contracts. So I think we can, thanks to our friends at Genesis. Maybe we can quote a little bit of contract volume here as well. 527 million worth of notional on Deribit, 55 million worth of OKEX. So they're coming in pretty strong over there. About 12 million worth of notional on CME, 3 million from LedgerX. And if you parse it all down there, at least on the Deribit side, 49,830 contracts, which if you look at it historically, it's a pretty big jump out there. So a lot of interesting stuff. I know you mostly focus on Deribit over there, Greg, but I'm curious. I kind of was just joking earlier, but it does seem like the backed options having a little bit of a difficulty attracting any interest right now. Any thoughts as to why folks are staying away? You think it's just a physically settled that is spooking people? You think something else is up over there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I imagine that the physically settled has some sort of impact there. I think the people who like to deal with the physical and own the coins and so on and so forth, they're the people who are trading basically on these crypto-centric exchanges. So maybe there's kind of a mismatch there. I think the other aspect is that it kind of seems to be like a winner take all. So I know, we had the CBOE Bitcoin future versus the CME Bitcoin future, and CME kind of won that game. And so maybe we're kind of seeing a repeat now. It's CME versus BAKKT, and now CME seems to kind of be winning that game as well. Hard to say exactly what's going on, but I do think that CME is going to be the winner.
Does seem like it's leaning that way, at least for now. It's hard to compare zero against anything, so hopefully BAKKT will get a little bit more traction out there. Speaking of traction, let's see what was lighting it up over the past week. You mentioned calls were dominating the tape, even though weirdly enough, some of the larger individual prints, at least over there on Deribit, came on the put side of the ledger back on the 29th of July to pretty much 500 lots of the 9,500 puts in August. So not my first choice for what I would have expected out there. So far today, not a lot lighting up the tape. The big prints, again, coming on Deribit, looks like about 300 lots of the 11,500 calls, which is pretty much a near out-of-the-money call at this point. Greg, I'm curious, you guys parse a lot of the flow on the Deribit Bitcoin options side. Any bizarre or interesting prints lighting up your tape this week that made you scratch your chin and say, that's kind of strange?
As far as individual prints, I have to dig in a little bit. I haven't looked at the individual prints. I'm kind of looking at the big picture, but what's really interesting is, per call ratio is 80% of the calls over the past week, basically. So that's been pretty interesting. You're seeing some of the block trades, some of the trades going through blocks. So on the 27th, you had about 985 contracts that were blocked. And so actually the proportional amount of trades that have been blocked versus non-blocked has actually been larger to the non-block side during this rally, whereas the rest of July had a higher percentage being blocked. So that's something that's kind of interesting.
Does that show you pretty much that more retail is participating, more smaller mom and pops out there as opposed to the large block-sized whales there, Greg?
Yeah, exactly.
No, you also mentioned across your radar this weekend an interesting little liquidation event we saw on Saturday night, I think to the tune of roughly $1 billion. I know that kind of put the hairs on the back of your neck, had them stand up a little bit. What were your thoughts on that there, Greg?
Yeah, so I have a couple thoughts on that. So the first thing is kind of right back to what I was saying about kind of the gamma position of these futures and these swaps. So something that's really interesting is that, if you're trading on BitMEX or trading on Deribit, your account is denominated in Bitcoin. And so you're long a Bitcoin future that gets more long as prices go down, and your account is denominated in Bitcoin. So the value of your account itself goes down as Bitcoin goes down. So you're kind of getting hit in two directions from being long. So having a liquidation like this is not too surprising, considering there's a little bit of fear of missing out on this rally and people got, super leveraged long. But then the post-price action to me is very interesting. So we've had this huge puke, and now the price action actually seems pretty constructive. Like this uptrend doesn't seem to have been completely collapsed due to that liquidation. And I mean, not to get into like too crazy of conspiracy theories, but if someone actually wanted to get long Bitcoin, one way that they could do it is actually sell the future first and then hope that there's some sort of cascade reaction and then get long the dip they essentially created. So there's potentially some sort of positioning like that. And I actually think that this puke is very constructive. We had the puke, positions get reset, and the uptrend still seems to be pretty intact.
I like your technical term there, the puke. But yes, we did see price action along those lines this week. And speaking of the price action right now, obviously we're north of the 11,000 strike out there in Bitcoin, and 11,000 is still where the lion's share of the open interest is out there, 11,200 contracts to be precise. Number two is kind of a bit of a almost three-way tie between about 12,000 with 9,600. So technically it's number two. Right hot on his heels are 10,000 and 14,000, both with 9,000 even. So it won't be too long before some of those other contracts start popping up, particularly if we continue this rally to the upside. We touched on CME a little bit earlier. They had a decent day last week out there. It was a pretty quiet week overall, contract volume-wise, with the exception of Tuesday. They did 1,101 contracts on Tuesday. You know I'm all about the contracts, the listeners. That most of that came, 820 of that 1,101 contracts came in what looks like one size vertical, the 12 half, 14 half vertical going up there 410 times again for a total 820 contracts. Looks like there's open interest, or I should say there's opening on both strikes. So it doesn't seem like it was a roll. There was someone just putting this on a straight up, a little bit of an upside vertical. Certainly you could see where we are right now. It might make sense. Someone might want to pick up that vertical out there. On the CME futures side, the light volume day today, only about 5,300 contracts on the tape come into showtime, but a pretty heavy volume week last week. Friday was about almost 13,000. Thursday, about 12,000. Wednesday, 13,000 again. Tuesday, 21,000 on the tape. And Monday, 25,500. So a pretty active day out there on the active week on the CME futures front. BAKKT, not as much. Our old friend, the BAKKT volume bot, chiming in here, looking at the total contracts, about 84.35. That's actually up about 150%. So that's not bad. OI, though, only up about 6%. We talked. That's on the futures front. Obviously, the options are still languishing out there. But maybe if the futures can continue to uptick a little bit over there, maybe that will drive some interest out there in all things BAKKT options. Because, again, we don't want just one player out there. We want a bunch of players doing a lot of volume because it gives you guys more choice, more options, pun intended, at the end of the day. So hopefully we'll see some of this volume ticking up. I know, Greg, we had to head on into the altcoin universe. But before we do that, anything else on your radar, anything else catching your eye or piquing your interest?
Yeah, actually, one more kind of point on Bitcoin. So I view the Bitcoin macro fundamentals super similar to gold macro fundamentals. I mean, if you view Bitcoin as a store of value, it's scarce, it's portable, it's divisible, and it's durable. And it's inelastic. So basically, it doesn't matter how many miners come online. All that does is increase the difficulty rate. It does not increase the issuance rate. But something that, if you use gold as a proxy for Bitcoin, something that's really interesting is that right now, gold vol, judging by like the GVZ index, is about 24%. This time last year is about 16%. And then Bitcoin vol is about 68% right now. And this time last year, for about 30 days, was 60%. So, like, judging by gold vol, Bitcoin vol hasn't gotten as crazy. And if the fundamentals are sort of the same, theoretically, you could see some demand from gold bleed into Bitcoin. Gold obviously has a much bigger market cap, has a $11 trillion market cap, whereas Bitcoin has a $200 billion market cap. So I do think there's something interesting there to be done as far as using gold as a proxy.
Well, everyone's got Bitcoin as digital gold on the brain. In fact, I do believe we have a listener question about that in a little bit, so we'll get into that more in a little bit here, listeners. But you're right, Greg, from a vol perspective, it is interesting. You know, gold vol for the longest time was effectively anemic. It wasn't really doing much of anything. If ever was a burst or a little bit of upside to it, it was very short-lived. Now we've seen a little bit more sustained vol, which is not surprising. Gold has been on the run of late, hitting new records again last week in the 1,900 plus range. So people saying, are we going to break 1,600? Well, did that, 17, 19, now up to 1,900. So Interesting times out there in gold. Not surprising that the vol would be coming to life. It certainly isn't exactly a Bitcoin level yet, but interesting stuff. That would be something interesting. We had a 1-to-1 gold versus the Bitcoin vol out there. Which one you'd pick going for? I got a feeling we have to have Bitcoin vol come in a wee bit before we have that conversation, but still interesting discussion. Everyone always talks about Bitcoin as the digital gold as a flight to quality asset, not so much from a volatility perspective. And maybe there is some interesting stuff to mine there, pun intended, Greg. As we head on into our next segment, it is time for the altcoin universe.
It's time to move beyond Bitcoin and find out what's moving the rest of the crypto marketplace. It's time to boldly venture into the altcoin universe.
All right, everybody, you know what time it is. Time to explore the altcoin universe. Going to kick things off, breaking down the top 10 out there in the marketplace. Remember, take the overall market caps with the big, healthy, delicious, hopefully, depends what kind of salt you use, I suppose, grain of salt out here. Let's start off. Number 10, Binance Coin, 2.8 billion. Number 9, Crypto.com coin back in the top 10 there. Just a tick under 3 billion overall market cap. Number 8, Litecoin, languishing at the bottom half of the top 10 yet again, 3.3 billion. Number 7, Cardano, 3.6 billion. Number 6, Bitcoin SV, 3.7. Number 5, Bitcoin Cash, 4.9 billion. Number 4, our old friend XRP, almost just a tick under 10 billion, 9.9 billion out there. Number 3, Tether, just a tick north of 10 billion over there. It means number 2, of course, ETH, 36 billion. Number 1 with a bullet. Bitcoin threatening the 200B level out there now as this rally has continued out there. Let's start, though, as we always have to in the altcoin universe, in the big dog, in the altcoin land. Number 2 overall, that is, of course, ETH. ETH having yet another huge week coming into showtime. We saw ETH right around 393 and change, and it's pretty much still there right around 394 right now as the show has progressed a little bit. Puts it up, about almost exactly 70 handles from where it was at the end of our show last week. In fact, yeah, it was 323.26, and coming into showtime, it was 393.24. It's almost exactly 70 handles up. So, and yet another good week for the ETH bulls out there. Before I break down some of this vol stuff, you kind of just touched on it earlier, Greg, but I know ETH is very much your baby over there at Genesis. You guys are always talking and tweeting and analyzing all things going on in ETH options. I mentioned you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier there with the Bitcoin breakdown and comparing it to Bitcoin, but what's been lighting up your tape? What's been catching your eye out there in the ETH options marketplace this week, sir?
Yeah, so ETH is definitely our baby. Big fan of ETH. Quite a few things. The first thing is looking at the open interest. So we had a peak open interest on June 26th of 715,000 contracts. Then on the 31st of July, that day expiration, we were at 950,000 contracts. And now after that expiration, we're still at 821,000 contracts. So we're still, despite this July expiration of open interest, we're still above the June 26th peak. So I think that's pretty telling as far as people positioning for some sort of move in ETH. The other thing, which I kind of touched on previously, is that a lot of the open interest is concentrated in this December expiration. And so I think that's pretty telling because we have some ETH events coming up. We have ETH 2.0 that's hopefully launching before the end of the year. I think that's going to be a big mover for ETH if that does happen. It could also be a big mover for ETH if that doesn't happen. Either way, I think there's some sort of price reaction in the ETH world due to that. And then something else to kind of consider is how have people been positioning themselves in this option market for ETH? And so, like I said earlier, the SKEW is very big to the call side. So there's some, and then the put side is very flat. So there's some very interesting stuff you can do to position yourself. Something that we like is that if you want to basically buy the swap, you could hedge that with a 1x2 on the put side, long the 2. You could create a risk reversal position, short the call, long the put. You could do a caller position, short the call, long the put. So we definitely think that's some advantages to kind of your option structure as a way to get long ETH if you're so inclined.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I like talking about 1x2s and collars out here. And it's nice to see that ETH is getting to that level where we can actually support that and make that viable from an overall. Sometimes the spreads in some of these other names are a little bit wide to make doing a 1x2 and anything a little bit prohibitive, but ETH is getting there, which you mentioned is kind of a good place to be. And let's start with the vol here. Vol obviously ticking up yet again from last show, listeners. It was a 58%. This is the 1 month realized now. Coming in today's show, 73%. So clearly it has been moving. Implied vol, same deal. It was 82% last show. Now it is 93% coming into showtime at the 30-day implied. The ADV also ticking up as the volume has continued to explode out there. It was 13 million on our last show. Now it's up to about 20 million worth of notional out there. The largest spike we've seen of late was a few days ago on the 1st, 56 million with the notional going up on Deribit. Worth noting, OKEX coming on strong out there as well from an overall ETH options perspective, doing about a little over 4 million worth of notional. Prior to that, our biggest spike was back on the 23rd with about 49 million worth of notional and about 7.5 million on OKEX. So pretty active time, and overall a very active week out there in ETH land. Pretty much most of all the days, or except for a couple, were pretty much north of that 40 million worth of notional. So ETH has been on the rampage even since our last show, and Greg kind of just broke it down. One of the things we like to watch out there is the OI. June, as you mentioned on the show, was kind of a record across the board for options open interest in Bitcoin and certainly in ETH. And a lot of people were worried that we wouldn't really retrace that, and yet July just rolled off the board, and the OI is well north of where it was. I think we hit a high of about 165 million worth of notional in June, and now we're almost 2x that. I think if you add in OKEX, which has about 30 million, 305 million on Deribit, we are pretty much 2x that. So interesting times out there, ETH options from an OI perspective. Let's see, a lot to unpack. I do like your notion. I'll have to dig into the SKEW a little bit there, Greg, but I like that idea now that we have rallied enough and the SKEW is favorable enough to look at some collars out there in ETH, which of course, listeners, is buying an out of the money put and then selling a farther out of the money call against that to try to finance some, if not all, of your put. And given where we are right now and given how the SKEW is favoring the calls out there, that could potentially give you a good shot. People are used to setting up collars in equities where, the puts are expensive and the calls are cheap. Might be a little bit of a flipping of the script. So it looks like from your perspective, Greg, I think the SKEW is setting up pretty favorably for some collars out there in ETH right now.
Yeah, definitely. You can collect your credit for that position.
Well, we like to hear that. Obviously, you're giving up some of your upside there, listeners, but these days, such a strong bid in both Bitcoin and in ETH out there that you're getting nice levels to sell those calls as opposed to giving away a worthless call in something like a SPY where no one really wants it. So if you like these levels, you're worried about a little bit of retracement, and you don't mind giving up some of that upside above a certain level, then maybe an interesting time to consider a collar out there. And good to see that the volume is getting up there now and the open interest is getting strong enough now where you could consider such a thing and not have to worry about getting killed on the bid-ask spread out there. Let's head on out to Ripple before we answer some of your questions. Ripple up pretty firm, up a good old 0.09. So coming into today's show, we got our old friend XRP north of the 30-cent level. Not too long ago, we were saying, man, it seems like it's gonna just dwindle away south of 20 cents. And people were worried about that this week. Back up north of 30 cents, 31 cents, almost 31 and a half almost coming into showtime. So maybe the naysayers out there in XRP were a little bit premature out there. We shall see if they can maintain this 30-cent level if we're talking about 20 cents again next week. Also got some runs here for Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin SV. Bitcoin Cash up 34.5 handles from last show. Bitcoin SV up nearly 30 handles from last show. I know you like to mostly focus on ETH out there, Greg, and I know from an altcoin perspective, it's far and away the most dominant contract over there from an options perspective. But any other altcoin on your radar out there when you could pull your nose away from the ETH SKEWs there, Greg?
So I'm kind of the opinion that ETH is definitely the best altcoin. There's all the other altcoins that I think are pretty interesting happen to live on ETH. So there's a lot of like DeFi coins that live on ETH. So for example, Compound Coin or the Makers token as well. Those are both very interesting. 0x, all these types of tokens which live on top of the Ethereum ecosystem and help develop the Ethereum ecosystem. Something that we think that's very interesting kind of with this rally is that there's a lot of DeFi activity going on. So for example, this time last year, there was about $1 billion worth of collateral locked up in the DeFi protocols. And now we're at about 4 billion. So we've grown by 4 times. Decentralized exchange volumes, which pretty much only live on Ethereum, all these DEXs for the most part on Ethereum. This was doing about $50 million of trading on average in July, and then most recently we've jumped up to $300 million in trading. And then lastly, all these stable coins, they also live on Ethereum. So 80% of them. So this time last year, we had about $4 billion worth of altcoins, stable coins living out there. And now we're at $12.5 billion of stable coins. So a lot of this growth that we're seeing happens to be built on top of the ETH infrastructure. And this past rally, we've had a altcoin rally. So a lot of the altcoins were rallying first. And they got to the point where the ERC20 tokens, like the collective market cap of all the ERC20 tokens exceeded the market cap of Ethereum. So basically, it's like the ecosystem of Ethereum is worth more than Ethereum itself. So there's a lot of catching up that ETH is doing right now. A lot of people make arguments as far as like maybe Cardano having a better scaling solution, and that would be a better kind of smart contract platform than Ethereum because they've already figured out the scaling. Where my point of disagreement is with that is that we have all the developer power being built on top of Ethereum right now. A lot of the dApps are being built on top of Ethereum. A lot of people who launched ICOs in 2017 have funds to continue to build on top of Ethereum. So developer power on Ethereum is the core Ethereum Foundation who developed the ETH protocol itself, plus everyone else who has a token built on top of Ethereum. So the ecosystem of Ethereum is so much bigger that I think that in the long run, there's just kind of more human brain power being built towards Ethereum.
I like that. That's a good point. You always focus on just the largest tradable asset out there, which is, of course, ETH itself. But the ETH ecosystem, as you put it, you're right. It has spread its tendrils pretty far and wide. I think the notion that the ecosystem itself is perhaps worth more now than ETH is kind of an interesting one, probably worth unpacking in and of itself. Greg, would you say, given how focused you guys are on ETH these days, would you say that most of the users coming to Genesis Vol these days, are they looking to kick the tires on ETH, or is it still Bitcoin bringing all the boys to the yard, as they say?
I think as far as straight option volume goes, Bitcoin is definitely the leader. I think Bitcoin is going to remain the leader for a while, just because Bitcoin has this first mover advantage. They've built all this infrastructure around it. It has kind of the widest adoption. It's kind of the most quoted crypto. And I think for a long time, Bitcoin's going to dominate. And that's cool. I'm happy for that. I think Bitcoin's great. As far as anything that's altcoin, it's definitely going to be Ethereum. And then anyone who's doing some DeFi stuff in the option space, like DeFi options, they're coming to us from the Ethereum side. So anything that's going to be decentralized finance is going to be on Ethereum. And so we cover some of that stuff, and people are interested in that, and they check us out for that as well.
That's true. You guys are the mecca for that as well. And we're the mecca for your questions. Without further ado, let's get to some of them on your Crypto Question segment.
You've got questions about crypto. Who doesn't? It's time to find out the answers to your crypto questions.
All right, everybody. Welcome to your Crypto Question segment. See how many of you can squeeze on here, the tail end of the show. First up, we got Goose. Goose wants to know, with this recent rally, this is kind of what we were just talking about, Greg, earlier in the show. With this recent rally, can we finally put a nail in the debate that Bitcoin is digital gold? It clearly is acting like it now for all the good and bad that offers. Yeah, that's kind of been one of the leading questions since we launched this show over a year and a half ago. What the heck really is Bitcoin? What masters does it serve? What is it actually correlated or perhaps not correlated to? And for a long time, people argued that it wasn't correlated. I've always beat that drum that when it all hits the fan, correlation tends to go to 1, regardless of what you think. And we certainly saw that play out with Bitcoin and most of the large crypto space there in the tailwind of March when people were liquidating everything they had. Bitcoin got caught up in that 30+% sell-off intraday. And now, of course, we've seen the rally. It's a little bit shorter-lived, I would say, than what we've seen in gold. The gold rally has been a little bit more protracted ever since the the sell-off kind of abated there in March. We've seen gold on the upswing. We didn't really see that for Bitcoin for the longest time. As I mentioned at the top of the show, beginning of summer, Bitcoin was kind of languishing. Post-halving wasn't really doing a lot. A lot of you guys are writing into us saying, what's going on with Bitcoin? It's not really doing anything. The vol isn't really doing anything. It's only in the last few weeks that we've seen this perk up, I think you can call it, out there in Bitcoin land. Whether that means that's digital gold, I guess if you look just from the last couple of weeks, sure, why not? But, Greg, this is an ongoing point of fascination with a lot of our audience. Folks, they just want to classify Bitcoin as something, and for whatever reason, they've drawn the battle line around gold. What are your thoughts on Bitcoin as a digital gold, and a Goose's point that it clearly is acting like it right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm strongly in that camp as well. I view Bitcoin as a store of value as opposed to a medium of exchange. I think the idea of using Bitcoin to buy your coffee at Starbucks and stuff like that, to me, is not as good as an idea of just buying and holding Bitcoin. And so that's kind of how I view gold. You don't pay for stuff in gold, you buy it and you hold it. And so to me, that makes sense with Bitcoin. And then as far as kind of the volatility drop that we saw before this last breakout, that sort of makes sense to me. We had this big sell-off, and then we came all the way back to those same levels. And so it's kind of natural that there was a little bit of a consolidation period where traders and investors kind of decided, what is this thing really worth? Should we take it higher? Should it go back down? So it kind of needed to digest a little bit. And so, when you get those consolidation periods, vol kind of goes nowhere and sort of crushes over time. And so I think that's kind of what we saw before this latest breakout. I think kind of just one last point is that it's very interesting to me that, crypto is so new. How do we value it? What is the true barometer of the value of crypto? And so not only do we not know how to value crypto, but we definitely don't know how to value the volatility skews and surface around crypto itself. So there's kind of a lot of edge, and it's kind of anyone's game, so to speak, as far as, what's the proper perspective on how to value these things and how to price them.
I like that. I think some of the market makers out there will be excited to hear that as well. There's still edge in a product out there to be found. It's harder and harder to find that elusive edge in a lot of the large listed equities and even some of the commodities out there these days. So the notion of edge, I think, is an interesting one out there in crypto. Next up, we have Nick. Nick6 wants to know, is there any other weird options flow you guys are seeing in other crypto outside of Bitcoin and ETH? Well, obviously, the lion's share of the action, as we just parsed there, Nick, was in Bitcoin and ETH. But Greg, you brought up an interesting point there at the end of the altcoin universe about the DeFi contracts. You guys are kind of paving the way in terms of analytics on that side of the fence. Any interesting order flow you've seen come across that of late that you want to share with Mr. Nick and the rest of our audience out here?
Yeah, so most of the DeFi options are still USD ETH pair based, but there's definitely some interesting stuff as far as the ETH DeFi options go. So you'll see a lot of differences in mismatch between implied vols on kind of centrally listed options versus these DeFi options. One of the reasons is that these DeFi options are kind of slow to respond. So if you have a big spike in price on Ethereum, it's going to change your implied vol around because the option's not really updating. So there's kind of like a lag that you have to go ahead and take that market while it's still there that you don't have in kind of the more centrally listed options. So that's something that's interesting. And then I know that some of these projects like OPID, they've started doing some options on altcoins. So there's some options on Compound, and I think there's some options on like Compound DAI and some stablecoin options, stuff like that. So there's definitely some exotic crypto options out there in the DeFi space.
All right, there you go. So Nick, you can look out there in the DeFi space. Check out Genesis. They have it all parsed for you. If you start looking beyond this, it's once you get beyond ETH, it really gets a little bit scattershot, which makes it a little bit challenging. So at least the Genesis guys doing the work for you, putting it all together in one place. Speaking of that one place, Alex wants to know, how big is the OTC options market for Bitcoin and others versus what we're seeing in the lit space? Well, that's been a fascinating evolution to watch. We started this show a little over about a year and a half ago. Yeah, almost exactly. And when we started this with the guys from Acuna because the predominant, the lion's share of the interesting volume that was going up in Bitcoin options, certainly, and definitely in ETH as well, was on the OTC side because there really wasn't a ton of lit paper out there. Deribit was doing paper and others. They were coming online more and more. But in terms of interesting lit paper, we can get stuff done for size and get it done with a decent spread behind it. It was challenging still. So OTC was kind of the place where it was at. And, fast forward a year and a half and we've seen, a market shift. Obviously, OTC still prevalent, still big. We have a lot of guests on here talking about what they're seeing out there. But look what we just talked about, the entirety of this show so far, how much volume is going up in the Bitcoin options, even now in ETH. That one's rocking and rolling out there these days. So the lit space to me is kind of where the more fascinating evolution has occurred because that space has really roared to life even since we launched this show. And it's so pleasant for me to be able to sit down and crunch and analyze SKEW and give you all these numbers and in marketplaces that you guys can actually participate in, unless you're going to do a 10,000 lot block in some of these. A lot of this OTC stuff is kind of off limits for you guys, but being able to actually see what's going up in these marketplaces you guys can actually trade in, that was kind of the reason that we launched this show. So I'm glad to see that evolution has occurred. Greg, you guys are parsing a lot of the flow out there in Deribit. You're also probably talking to a lot of firms that are playing or at least have one foot in the OTC space. How would you categorize the evolution of those two recently for our listener here, Alex?
Yeah, so I would say one of the great benefits of OTC trading is being able to execute a multi-legged trade all at once. As of right now, if you want to do that, the only place to really do it is on Paradigm, which basically allows you to negotiate a trade with some of these market makers that are doing both OTC and listed markets. And then that trade will execute. It will settle on Deribit or settle on CME. As far as who's doing what, I know actually on your last show, you had Joshua Lim from Genesis Trading. He's one of the big players in the OTC space. So there's definitely a lot of activity still in the OTC space, but it seems like the activity on the listed space, which allows kind of the smaller players to come and partake, is definitely exploding. So long term, I think we're going to see more and more activity on these listed spaces like Deribit or OKX and CME and so forth.
Yeah, we had dueling genocide here on the show last couple of weeks. What's with Genesis and crypto, Greg? It seems like that's the hot name out there these days.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually it's because people call the first block in the blockchain the Genesis block. And so I think a lot of people in the blockchain space have seen that idea of, the Genesis block. So Genesis has kind of been a hot name, so to speak.
So not a bunch of religious zealots running around out there is what you're saying in the crypto space out there. All right, I think we got time for one more. We kind of answered this one already, but we'll give Will Ruff his time here on the show. Will Ruff wants to know, what is the Bitcoin option SKEW telling us about the future outlook? Well, Greg, you are the keeper of all that great data over there. It's kind of what you do day in, day out. Again, we touched on this a little bit earlier in the Bitcoin breakdown out here, but if you had to categorize it really succinctly for our listener here, Will Ruff, what would you say about what the SKEW is telling you right now, sir?
Yes. So I would say, because the SKEW is so big to the call side, I would say that the option market is telling us that if we rally, we're going to rally with more volatility than if we sell off. So if we're going to have a rally, it could be a sharp rally. And if it's a sell-off, it won't be as sharp to the downside.
There you go. I asked for it succinct. Doesn't get more succinct than that. So hopefully that answers your question there, Will Ruff. And unfortunately, that music means we've come to the end, not just of the crypto questions segment, but of the entire crypto rundown. Great program. Glad you guys could join us out there. A lot to parse in this week's activity. Probably could have spent the whole hour just going tick by tick to some of the size trades out there on the different platforms in both ETH and Bitcoin. So check them out for yourselves. And Greg, if folks want to check out a cool Bitcoin and indeed ETH and indeed DeFi options analytics platform, where should they go? What should they do, Greg?
Yeah, so you can sign up for an account over at genesisvolatility.io. Right now we're still in our free phase, so hurry up and get there before we put up the paywall. And then you can follow us on Twitter over at GenesisVol, and then you can see our newsletter, which is found at genesis.substack.com. genesisvolatility.substack.com.
I can definitely vouch for the newsletter. It's good reading. So even if you're leery about signing up for something right now, which I definitely encourage you to do as well, definitely check out the newsletter because it's got a great succinct breakdown of what's going on in the ETH SKEW and the Bitcoin SKEW, all sorts of fascinating stuff. And Greg, I know it's been a little while since you were on. I think the last time you were on was back in May. So maybe let's leave our listeners a little bit of a tease of what you guys have added, maybe any tweaks or upgrades to the platform you make to maybe incentivize them to go kick the tires for themselves.
Yeah, so one of our latest features, which is really cool, it allows you to pick out individual instruments. So Bitcoin 10,000 call strike that expires in March, for example. So you can pick out that individual instrument, and you can see how open interest versus volume has been affected over time. So you can follow the volume and see, okay, this person bought and open interest ticked down, or this person sold and open interest increased. So it gives you a really good idea of how the volume is affecting the overall positioning in the market. And you can see if people are doing closing out trades or opening trades. That's something that's our latest feature that's pretty interesting that people like.
There you go. Kick the tires for yourself over there at genesisvolatility.io. Remember that .io at the end there, listeners. Give them a follow while you're at it on the old Twitter as well, at GenesisVol. There you go. So if you want a place to kick the tires and light the fires, at genesisvolatility.io. And on behalf of Greg and indeed myself, I want to thank all of you out there for downloading, for streaming, for subscribing, for listening live, for sending in such great questions. Remember, if you like what you hear, keep those reviews coming on your platform of choice so it keeps the influx of new folks discovering this program. If you like to talk crypto derivatives, it's really kind of the only game in town. So glad to see so many of you are liking it. We'll be back next week. Of course, in between that, you can check out all the great stuff we have hitting the network, including Options Bootcamp. If you're new to options, a lot of you folks are flocking into that one. So check that one out if you're new to an Options Playbook Radio. Another hot one. If you like this show, you might like that. If you're a little bit more experienced on the options side, you understand what we're talking about here with SKEW and all that good stuff, and volatility views, probably a fun one, as well as the option block. A lot of goodness for you guys to find over there on the network. And we'll see you back here next Monday for more of the Crypto Rundown.
You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com.